Hello and welcome to Muse Jam Session Recording 171. My name is Danny Beaumont and I'm a product manager on the Adobe Muse team. Our session today is focused on the responsive feature set and really looking at how you design content, best practices around mobile design. I am joined today by at least I'm joined by a lot of construction outside the recording space I'm in. So apologies if you're hearing a lot of banging. We'll see how the hour goes. I'm also joined by two of my colleagues from the Muse team, Dana, who's our lead QE engineer, and Lance Bouchard, who is one of our terrific senior engineers on the team. So our intent today is to teach you what we know and experiment a little bit with the new feature set of responsive around mobile design. It's also an opportunity for you to use chat to ask any questions that you have with the product. I've asked you to complete the presenter pod down here. There's an area for questions and such that, if I can get this thing up and running here, that I'm going to glance at. If you have questions specifically for me, this presenter pod is a good space to ask those questions. If they're general questions for either the community or Lance or Dana, go ahead and throw those into the chat pod. And I will begin my session. I'm going to try to ignore that noise, but it's going to kill me, I tell you. So I am working, as you are, with the new build of Muse and the responsive feature set. Let me do one more thing here quickly. That responsive feature set, and it's a work in progress. Again, in the spirit of a jam session, I'm going to focus on things that I've been learning as I've evolved towards responsive design. I had a realization as I was preparing for this session. I think we're still in a place where, as we focus on mobile, I'm going to give you some pointers to best practices and some starter opportunities with templates and widgets and such to get you going. I think the next session that I'm going to do will be the top 15 or 20 tips and tricks that early adopters of the responsive feature set have come up with for building out a site. So really getting into how did you do that menu, how did you do that responsive behavior. So I'm thinking that'll be the topic for 2 weeks from today. And in today's session, still getting started. For this guy, I am going to share my link. You'll notice I've got an Evernote link right here. I'm not done yet. Let me go ahead and give you this link, but I need to continue to work on it. So what I'm going to do is in the recording session, if you're looking at this on YouTube, for example, you can click the link in the notes down at the bottom. I want to still work on this. You guys can see the work in progress, but I'm going to refine it a little bit soon. Okay, let me get to your chat pod, and I will give you that link. I'm just going to look at the questions here. Actually, I'm going to toss it to Dana and Lance. There's a couple questions in the presenter pod around scroll effects and fluid and fixed breakpoints. Dana and Lance, I'm going to toss it your way, if that is okay, and dig into the session at the moment. Getting my train of thought together here. Okay, so much better. One point to make up front, there are two areas that have changed if you're used to Muse, if you've used it in the static or the alternate layout world. The first one is scroll effects. Right now, they don't play really nicely with responsive design. And the reason for that is, if you think about it, a scroll effect is usually defined by the top of the browser hits a certain point and an object on the canvas fades or appears or moves in a certain behavior. That's really difficult to calculate, or even as a designer to figure out if the width of your browser is changing. And so we, as such, have disabled scroll effects in any Muse design that you are working on that has more than one breakpoint. So if you use the current version of Muse and open up an old site that's a static design that by default has a single breakpoint, you can continue to use scroll effects. On certain pages in your design, let's say your landing page, you really want sexy scroll effects to create some wow. You can continue to have those scroll effects. It's only when you add a second breakpoint that we alert you that you'll disable scroll effects. I believe, Lance is here, so he can believe more than me because I'm not a coder, but I believe it's our intention to investigate how we can implement the appropriate scroll effects features, the most critical ones, in this moving target known as responsive design with multiple breakpoints. So I know it's on the table for us to examine. I'm not sure about timing for that, but I do think it's our intention to bring something back there. The other area that really is evolving is the widgets that we have. The widgets that are out of the box within Muse, many of them were built with the concept of fixed design and structure. So all of the components of, let's say, a slideshow widget, a previous and next button, captions and such, we have not gone in and re-engineered all of those elements to allow you to define the responsive behavior for each of them. So part of what we'll do in the next session that I'm talking about for tips and tricks is talk about specifically which widgets, like the menu widget, the accordion widget, lightbox widget. These are being employed quite a lot in the world of responsive because those widgets do work well with you in responsive design. So that's, I think, an area that you can expect us to continue to fix bugs, in essence, to enable some responsive behavior to the existing widget set and start to really rethink how widgets are being handled in the world of responsive. Again, I really want this session to make sure we're thinking about mobile and the new responsive feature set. So I want to go through some of those basics here as we're working. Let's see. I usually like to start with best practices, and the world of mobile. If you've been to my sessions in the past, we've talked about mobile design using Muse and alternate layouts. And the idea there was that there are three classes of devices: desktop, tablet, and smartphone. And using something known as viewport scaling, we would scale an alternate layout for each of those classes of devices so that you could control the content for that. What happened in the years that we implemented alternate layout is that the devices that are in those classes have become so many, so vast, that it's pretty much impossible to say you're going to design for every single screen and every single class of device. For example, if you take an iPhone 6 Plus and you turn it to its landscape mode, the web thinks it's a tablet. It's large enough as a phone that it falls into the tablet category. So the mindset with responsive is really you're designing a beautiful experience from its largest state to the smallest state. And at any one moment when your content, your actual artwork, becomes crowded, is overwhelmed in its content, when your design breaks in essence, that's when you add a breakpoint and change out your design. And as a designer, that's sort of the technical truth, and that's how you'll work within Muse. But I really encourage you, before you even begin to open up the Muse application, even if you're taking a pencil and a piece of paper out, to start to think about this idea of responsive in a very, very different way. And I'll give you an example. We did starter files last summer. So there's a set of starter files. I'll even show you this because I haven't referenced it. But if you go to muse.adobe.com, this is a great repository of just content all about Muse. And the landing page is usually built directly within Muse, as it is right now. So it's an example of responsive design, built everything here in Muse. But in the tutorials area, we have a section for what's known as starter designs. And we delivered these last summer in some geos, not everywhere in the world, pretty much English only North America region, as a test. And we're now making them available in the welcome screen. When you click it, it takes you to this space. What we did is the designer, Ali Pordelli from Cookie.com, worked with us. And we thought through, knowing that responsive was really just around the corner, thought through building out 5 designs that were responsive ready. And I think Ali and I both learned some really significant lessons around that, in that until you really understand responsive, and I think you really understand technically what it does to your site, you can't really predict or stick your head there until you're ready to actually try the tool out. So for example, we've redone 2 of these starters. Exposure and Kava are now responsive designs. And both Ali and I ran into challenges around the design and the structure. I think that the way I would handle, if I have a client who has an alternate layout design that I've done for them in the past, as a designer, I probably would not say, hey, buddy, you know how you wanted responsive design? I've gone in and updated the site to do that. It's not a quick change. It's not as though you just suddenly select everything on your site and say, start to be squishy or fluid or move around very easily. I think you really start to think about the design process very, very differently. And I would suggest that building out a responsive site is when you have a brand new client and they're paying you the full upfront money to build out a responsive site, more than going to past existing sites and redoing the work, unless your client wants to pay you to really redo a significant amount of work on the site. And some of these articles that I have really talk about the best practices around mobile design. And I think there's a couple of big categories that come up for me, at least. There's this, to me, it's kind of funny because sometimes there's a trend where no one mentions a solution until, no one mentions that you have a problem until they have the solution for that problem. And there's been trending in the last few years around flat, card-based, responsive, mobile-first design, that whole kind of trending world here. And I've got a number of articles about flat design. The thing I think is funny about it is it came probably, in my opinion, from the reality that designers, when they're trying to design a responsive site, if you've got a ton of objects that are all moving and being interpreted in different ways, it's overwhelming as a designer to think through all of these permutations. So the idea of flat design is make it simple. Keep it card-based in structure so that elements might be 3 across in a wide design, a tablet might be 2, and then a phone might be 1. If you had the idea of cards or components, it's so much easier to adjust to all of those different layouts. And I don't want to get into it too much during this session now, but I really encourage you to just skim through some of these links or find links of your own around the idea of mobile first and flat design. The other thing that's absolutely intrigued me has been around menus. So there's, first off, how do I handle an enormity of information from a menuing standpoint, this idea of persistent navigation when I'm designing for responsive? And the other is the hard reality, which is how do I try to use the existing widgets or existing design within Muse to embrace such menuing strategy for responsive. So I've personally been spending the last couple of weeks really understanding what are the menu best practices that are out there that hand coders are implementing, and what can we apply within Muse. So this is a list of what I've found, and towards the bottom this is actually my scratch pad. This is why I kind of have to clean it up a little bit. But I thought this was a really good example of a very clean, simple menuing design for a responsive site that had a ton of data. So I do think it's kind of funny. Most sites, when they go to responsive, you'll see they start to just trim down the content immensely. And you may have that luxury with your client. You may say, hey, you know what? Let's put a lot less content on your site. It's trending. It's the way to go. You don't always have that luxury. I think a lot of times clients say, I need everything on their site, and you have to find a way to make it work. In the world of best practices for mobile, I thought this was a terrific site. It's not built in Muse, but it's a great direction that I can take. I know I'm personally using this structure for a site that I'm working on. And notice in the design mode here, I've got navigation up towards the top here. I've got a menu on the right-hand side, and I've got a logo over here. And as I drag the edge of my browser, I've got what's known as a fluid breakpoint. So everything's kind of moving or centering a little bit here. Notice the navigation is pinned to the right-hand side, and it's moving closer to the logo as I'm dragging until I hit a breakpoint. So let's go back to that. Notice that the space here is getting a little visually inappropriate, right? The content is blending with the logo. And when I get to just about a point where that's true, I, in essence, have a breakpoint. Now, this is probably a hand-coded site, and the transitions between breakpoints, you may not see it over Connect, but you'll see sort of a smooth transition from one breakpoint to another. Muse pretty much does distinct breakpoints. You'll see a flash in the browser and it jumps to the next breakpoint. Our argument with that is that, in all honesty, the viewer of your website is not going to go grab the edge of the browser and drag it back and forth. It's cool from a design standpoint, but it's not a real use case for viewers of your site. They're usually going to go to their device and browse to your site, and the content will fit that design, fit that space appropriately. As I continue here, though, I'm in that second breakpoint, and I get to where that navigation's getting pretty crowded again. And let's see. The next jump that I go to is kind of sweet. It's what's known as a hamburger menu, and it's using pretty much an accordion structure. So these are things, this is something that I'm achieving in Muse right now. So what I can do is click here. Actually, this is one thing that you can't do directly in Muse, but I got a solution for you on that. This is something known as a push menu. And what's happening is, by clicking on this trigger, in essence, it's bringing out a panel here on the right that has content, okay? We're going to talk about that towards the end, I promise. The other thing they did that I thought was awfully clever is they have it's kind of a previous and next button. So you'll notice this is a pretty heavy menu. I've got home, services, work, and such. If I jump to the work page, that same persistent navigation is there. I can jump forward or backward. There's services, and then I can also jump back to the home page. So I have the choice of either using the hamburger menu and its drop down, or in this instance, push form, or just going previous and next. And then as I continue to come smaller here to what would probably be a phone layout, notice what happens. The logo gets smaller, and I still have the advantage of that sort of previous and next, but because I'm in an incredibly constrained design, I've got my hamburger menu that's popping out there, but I can at least go next, next, next on the phone to jump to the next page in the site. If I come back out to expand this again, the other thing I liked about it that is, again, very real world for complex websites, if I come into, let's say, services, notice that I've got content here at the top. I've got my navigation, and as I scroll up a little bit, let's see if I can scroll up. Okay. As I scroll up, I do have a pinned navigation, and there is a gradient here. Now, this is one of those scenarios where we used to do this, all of us, using scroll effects, and we've got to be a little more clever about that now. It's possible to have a gradient that you can define that fades up here, but it's a little trickier without scroll effects there. I can at least pin my navigation using the existing feature set. Another thing that they've got going on here is, notice that they're pinning this top navigation here as well. But what they've effectively done is added a second tier of navigation. Now, you could, again, with the lack of scroll effects, you could come in and just have primary nav for big pages that don't have much content, and then secondary nav that looks like this for, let's say, a services page that has all of these elements. If I come to the work page, for example, it doesn't have that submenu in it. Let's just see here. Chalkboard, I think, does. So notice right away on Chalkboard, I click there, and I've got that sub navigation that takes me to anchor tag locations on that same page. So it's jumping around. Actually, this one's not anchors, but it could be for us. It's actually individual pages as you go along. So to me, I think as a designer, the thing that's challenging and most important as you move in the world of mobile design is to really storyboard. Go hit a whiteboard or hit a piece of paper. Think through all of the content and really think through this idea of multiple breakpoints. How will you behave when you've got the maximum content, and how are you going to resolve that when you go down to minimum content? I think those are incredibly important. So I'm going to swing back and make sure you guys are all good. And then the next thing I want to do is, and Dana and Lance, if there's anything that you really want me to address, keep it on the clipboard, and when I swing back, paste it into chat, if nothing else. Uh-oh, Lance has got a private message for me, but you know what? I hope he didn't say anything really bad, because if I switch to it, everyone's going to see it. Well, good. Lance is a smart man. It's actually a public question for me. What's the name of the extension which displayed top left corner of Danny's browser? Okay, absolutely. That's some of what we're about to address, which is some of the tools that you use to preview and browse and such. So excellent prompt for me around that. As you're working within Muse, you have this wonderful opportunity, which is preview in browser. And that's a means by which you can come in and preview your design before you create a trial, before you push it up in a public way at all. So let's say I were in Adobe Muse here, and I was working on a design. I have two websites that are fully designed. They're templates that come from our template providers. One is from Muse Theme, and the other one is from 123 Muse. And they both are terrific examples of everything we've just discussed in action, using everything that's natively within Adobe Muse. So no special edition widgets for the most part, just really straight up native Muse functionality. Let's assume for a moment I've just designed this out. And to the question that I just had, how do I preview or get a sense of what this is going to look like in different browsers and such? I'm going to come on into this design, and I'll pull down under File to preview the site in the browser. So Muse is going to use something called localhost, or basically my internal IP address for my machine, and it will allow me to view the full site in the browser. It's kind of got some substance here, so we'll let this go ahead and render all the content while I take a sip of my coffee. So this is the design. This is from Muse Themes. It's a template that you can download. I think it's $29, or if you sign up for their service, which is like $69, you can get everything on their site. But it has, as I mentioned, some of the best practices we've talked about with responsive. So the question was, what the heck does Danny have on this upper little corner here? I have two different toys that I've been playing with. One is called Built With, and that just allows you to sniff the back end stuff in a site. When I do site of the day, people are tricky. They'll sometimes build it in Squarespace or WordPress and send it to me and say, hey, can you showcase this? So I've got to sniff the site and see on the back end how it was built, and that's what that does for me. This other tool is awfully nice. I personally have found a bug that if anybody wants to, in the spirit of a jam session, tell me the fix to it, it would be great. It's a free utility. I think it's called Breakpoint. We could take a look real quick here. Let's just look at my extension. Or let's just try to bring it up here for a second. Yeah, it's called Breakpoint, fancy name for it. The thing that I like about it is minimally it is simply telling you the exact pixel width of your browser, which I find really helpful. There's another feature there that I haven't gotten to be able to work, which is when you bring it up, I can't even bring it up right now, it will allow you to predefine certain fixed sizes and jump between them. But notice how that value is changing. So when I'm working and I set a breakpoint, let's say I've defined a breakpoint in a preview in browser and the text is wrapping sooner than I thought it would. Getting the absolute value here allows me to easily go into Muse and set a breakpoint to a specific spot. So I like this tool just for testing a little bit. You do have to make sure that you're at actual size, or else it becomes inaccurate and can confuse the heck out of you. The other thing that I do a lot, that I've seen a number of Muse designers that are working with responsive do, is I'm going to come in and copy this URL now, and I'm going to jump over to Safari, and I'm going to paste it in here. So I'm not a big Safari user myself. I'm more of a Chrome person, but Safari does have a terrific advantage right now. And that's with this, notice it's showing my IP address. With this preview in browser temporary site that's cached in essence in my browser, I can come in, so I haven't published it anywhere, but in Safari, if I click on the develop mode and select the enter responsive design mode, It's a really nice way to come in and see all of your design states across many, many different devices. So I can go all the way from a desktop view here and interact with my site and see exactly how it's rendering, all the way down to portrait and landscape iPad. I've got an iPhone 6 portrait and landscape. I can go as small as, although I don't know anyone who really has an iPhone 4 anymore, but I can still see how well the design is working in all of these scenarios. So this is built into Safari. I actually recently realized you can actually come to the edge and do your own scrubbing here, as though you were in a full browser or in the design canvas of Muse, and have a nice quick scrub and see that design effect. So Safari is another terrific way to go. In my notes, Christopher Kellett from 123 Muse also gave me a couple other pointers to some good tester layout tools. A mobiletest.me, and then Quirk Tools Screenfly. So, and then a Responsinator. Again, these are my notes of things that I've gathered up from various sources. So depending on what you're looking to do, these different tools have different capabilities. Interestingly enough, even though Safari is built by Apple, I think they would have to admit that simulating a device in a desktop browser takes you so far, but not always perfectly far enough. So the truth of the matter is this is a great way to proof what you're looking at, make sure things are good, but nothing really, sadly, substitutes actually owning each of the devices and loading it up. Go ahead and ask Dana on chat how many mobile devices she's looking at in her office right now. I think it will be a lot, both Android, iOS. She's got tablets, she's got desktop. I don't know if she has many desktop devices, but she's got a whole heck of a lot more than most people I know. So all of these tools, I think, are effective in doing that proofing. Okay, what I want to do now is actually look at these templates and just talk about, as I mentioned, I think part 2 of this session in 2 weeks is going to be where I come in and say, see this finished effect? Let's go in and see how exactly it was done. For now, I want to show maybe not so much how it was done. If you're desperate to see how it's done, you can go ahead and download these templates. But for the moment, let's look at the best practices and the design capabilities that these templates are employing within Muse. So for the Pioneer site from Muse Themes, I'm just going to go directly to their preview. So this has actual images in the design. And I can come in and check out that live preview. And along with, consistent with that site that I just showed you that was not built in Muse, we have really good menuing being employed here in the design. So here I am in the desktop mode. I've got my logo here on the left. I've got my navigation on the center and social buttons here towards the right. I've got social buttons as well on the left. Now again, this is a template. So as a designer, you probably would pick one of the social approaches there and not both. But a good template will allow you to pick between a couple of approaches and delete what you don't want. I'm scrolling down on the page, and some of what this is actually Steve Harris and Christopher Watson, some of what they've done here that I really like is, although there are no scroll effects, they're still pushing the envelope of interactivity and the idea of revealing content given the feature set that we have available now. So they've got a little GIF animation here, or edge animate perhaps, but it's just a little, it's probably just a GIF that's indicating that you can scroll down. And as I do so, notice they've defined a background image here that's probably persistent. It's just probably a background full screen background that just gives a little bit of depth to the site. Again, these are tricks that we all knew back before scroll effects came into our life that we're having to pull back out of our back pocket. I have a button here, and notice this is a state button, so it changes both the stroke and the text as I roll in and out of that button. And then I've got some images that are here, and this is a 3 across design. Now as a designer, you get to decide at what point does this get too crowded, and do I want to take that that grid-based concept and start to move content around. So if I press the edge of the browser here, notice that what's happening, and this is where you start to get good at dissecting pieces and parts here. Let me try to come back here for a second. So I've got some text that's here, and from what I can tell right now, this could be a fluid container, but the container is so large and the space so large, I'm not seeing any text wrapping right now, or it could just be set at a fixed position without any, basically set to not resize the container. But the images definitely are responsive in height and width, which means that as I minimize the width of the browser, the height and the width of those images is scaling. And notice that there's a fixed distance from the text to the image. That's really good. You want to make sure that that is retained, because although the images are changing in size, the distance should not change. When I roll over these objects, I've got a nice, I think this is just a gradient fill that, so within Muse, let me just show you this real simply. If I come to one of these containers, what I can do, he's probably done it, here's my guess. So if I go to a rollover state under effects in the glow area, he's added a dark glow. It just gives you a nice interactive feeling for those elements. So as I roll over, I get that gradient, and I have some text that's down here. But let's keep going. I'm curious if he's going to go ahead and hit a breakpoint and change this grid structure. So it's scaling these three images. Yeah, when I hit a big breakpoint, still the three images. In this design, it stays 3 across. Let's see if I go all the way down to phone. Yeah, there definitely hits a point where no matter what you're doing, it's unrealistic to keep your existing structure. So I've got the 3 across design here, and if I get, and this is where I love this tool, I'm at about 571 pixels, and if I jump specifically probably, looks like right at, my hypothesis would be at right about 550, it goes to a single tiled image instead of 3 across, with the text all centered below it. So adjusting to the design there. If I go to the View More Work page, there's this is really a beautiful template. They did amazing work with, as I mentioned, brand new Muse responsive in the existing feature set. So notice that in this sort of a gallery experience, I've got a 3 across structure until I get a little more crowded, and this is a little more to my liking at about 700 pixels. Instead of trying to do a tile-based design of 3 across, they go ahead and add a breakpoint and then move it to 2 up in its design. And then if I get a little bit slower or smaller here, it goes to 1 up. But notice what they're doing in the design in its larger state. If you really are trying to build a portfolio or a gallery of content, showing a detailed view like, hey, here's my work, I did this project, and when you click on it, you can have almost Behance-like notes about how that project was implemented. When I click on any one of these images, I get a detailed view for my site. So I've got project details. And this looks like it's a slideshow. So with previous and next happening here, I'll tell you a fundamental trick with the slideshow widget. You'll see this as a design pattern, not because it's necessarily what everybody wants from a design standpoint, but it's a way that the Muse widgets tend to work beautifully right now, which is if you have the slideshow widget, which I'm pretty sure that's what this is, I've got a close box, I've got a previous and next box, and I've got a caption here. What they've done is they've aligned these elements to the left. This is a lovely trick that will allow you to make sure that as the width of my browser reduces, these objects don't disappear, they don't move around in an odd way. Notice in the structure, my column here, I'm just checking myself here, I think it's set to be fluid. Notice how the text here in the width is flowing in the column. That's because the container is set to fluid width. But it's and I'm just looking here. Yeah, the overall container is probably also fluid, so it's getting smaller as my text starts to wrap until I probably get to a point, where it's not feasible to really have it showing, so it goes away. And that's the other big part about mobile design that I hope you're doing on a whiteboard or a piece of paper, which is given the devices that these are going to render in, what is the most critical information? And these are tough decisions because in some ways, customers kind of, when they look for something, if they're on their phone and they're standing in the grocery store, they may be looking for something they saw when they were on their computer back at home. So do you make sure that everything in your design is viewable on every single device? Or do you just hide or delete content that's inappropriate for someone in the grocery store standing in line with a very small mobile device? So really starting to think about what is the intent behind your viewer, why are they there, why would they be coming to the website, and what information is most relevant? Because reading everything on a site on your phone is really difficult. Maybe there's a reason why they need to see it all, but if you can work with your client and really think through what's the most critical information that needs to be known as compared to what they might basically do. Like, do they really need to fill out a contact form, a full contact form on their phone? Or would you direct them to go to the desktop device where that form exists? These are the mental anguish questions you need to answer, I think, before you sit down and work with the Muse application. Okay, let's go ahead and look a little bit more about how this site was built, and then we're going to go to a second template that I want to show you. So we've seen this kind of in the after mode. I do want to point out, it's just, again, I think they did a terrific job with this site. Notice as I'm reducing the width of the browser, it's kind of interesting. Notice where my artwork is here. When I get to one of my breakpoints, the column starts to overlap. See how it's starting to overlap the width? I believe what we've got going on here is this slideshow changes to a full screen slideshow. And that allows you to, in essence, this is pinned, it's not moving here. And maybe they pinned it, or maybe it's full width. If it were full width, I'd be losing a lot of content under this column. So I'm thinking maybe they've just pinned it in location. But that allows you to scroll this column on the right-hand side to go to other related projects, which is just really a sweet, deep implementation using the existing Muse feature set. So let's go try to see if any of what my conjecture is correct based on this design. So we'll come back out to the site plan, and I can see, I just really want to focus in on this gallery a little bit. I've got a detailed project page, and then I've got the 3-up tile that we've seen. If we come in and look at that 3-up tile, notice that, interestingly enough, we've got 2 levels deep of breakpoints. See the little triangles here? That's indicating, if I go back out to my master and jump to, let's go ahead and go to the same master, that interior master that's being applied to this gallery. And as I jump there, there are breakpoints, and it probably has to do entirely with the header and the footer here. So I've got Pioneer, and I've got my little hamburger menu as dots, so looking more like chocolate kisses than a hamburger. But notice in its smallest breakpoint, I've got that nav there. I come to the next spot. As I extend out, at a glance, I'm not positive why they have all of the breakpoints on the master here. I can see my navigation at this breakpoint with social media. In the second instance, I jump to the mobile menu in essence. But between this guy and this guy, I'm not positive why they needed to add another breakpoint. Perhaps it's because they wanted to stack the content in a centered row here. Go to 480, another breakpoint. And again, it's centered. So my hypothesis, I guess I could poke a little bit more and find out from the guys why they added, for example, a breakpoint at 480 and 550. They both look to be the same to me. So maybe if we expand out the hamburger menu, there's a difference there. Not really. So in general, trust me, you do this the wrong way and then you start to change your mind. You want to minimize the amount of breakpoints that you possibly can minimize. And the reason for that is as you're designing, you'll see when you have multiple breakpoints, there are tricks for applying content across breakpoints, but really designing out your largest breakpoint as fully as possible and then adding additional breakpoints is definitely something you'll find the best productive, to be the best productive approach. The other is just if you can get by with less breakpoints, it makes your life a lot simpler. Let's go back out to the page now. And we've got that 3 across column, as we know. I'll zoom out a little bit. You can see that they went in and dropped some of the same breakpoints here because the triangle is matching the actual page breakpoint. We made a decision that breakpoints on masters do not automatically blow into a breakpoint on an individual page. It's very easy to go in and apply one. What you do is double click on the master breakpoint, the little triangle, and it'll offer to allow you to create one on the page at that location. But notice I've got a 3 across structure here. I jump in and I quickly go to the 2 across structure. I've got that accordion menu expanded still, so let's get that out of the way. So if I collapse that, come back into my page here, I can see I go 2 across, makes a ton of sense to me. And then I've got 1 across very quickly as I come along. And then I've got my last breakpoint where I still have the 1 across. Still a mystery to me why they have a 480 and 550, but I'm sure Steve will call me once he watches this and tell me the answer. For sure, because I'm just sure he's waiting to answer that question. So pretty simple structure, I think you can see. Let's go to that other page, the detail view. I'm really fascinated about how they built this guy out. So I hit Command 0 to zoom on out fully. And what I can see is indeed the slideshow that's here. It's pinned to the center of the browser. Let's just dissect this and break it for a moment and see what we get. If I can. I want to get this guy out of the way. So if I delete it, yeah. So I deleted the sidebar. This is an interesting approach, to be honest, because if you have a client and they've got real artwork here on the right-hand side, if you cover up that artwork, you may end up within your fluid design losing out on some critical content to that right-hand side. But if you can pull it off, this is a beautiful approach. So we have basically a column that's here, and selecting that column, I can see it's set to be a fluid column, and it's just placed on the page. You really, when in doubt, pin nothing until you see how everything behaves. And if you have to, pin it either to the browser or to the responsive page. But by default, try not to pin. When you don't pin and you place content, it uses basically percentage-based design. So this column will remain a fixed percentage of the total width of this breakpoint. If the breakpoint is reduced by 20% in width, the column will also match that 20% reduction. And that behavior works really well if you have nothing pinned and the fluid width going on here. With my text container, again, fluid width, just placed there. My images, when you think about it, you don't want the images ever to just be, to resize the width. You want to do width and height. If you did ever want to resize images only in the width, the trick for doing that is to create a container and paste your image in the background as a background image, and that will end up cropping the width. But that's not usually the approach. You're usually going to want your images to remain proportional. So that's the approach they've got here, which is basically a container with proportional resize defined for it. So it's using that responsive width feature. In fact, I've contradicted myself here. My assumption is because they've done that as responsive width, what you would want to do is go ahead and fill the container as a background image and define it to be scale to fill the container. So it's worth kind of showing that for a second. Let me go in and just grab something that is not too incriminating. We've got the GoPRC tickets here, very exciting. I'm going to place them on the canvas here, and I'm just going to cut them for a second. I'm going to go to this container here, and I'm going to, let's see, I might be being trickier. There you go. Notice paste as background image. Instead of having to go file browse for this file, I just put it on the clipboard and I can now paste as a background image in the wrong spot. Let's do that again. Here, paste as background image. The other thing I'm going to do is make sure I don't have a fill color. This is where when it's not your template and you demo in front of people, things can go really wrong. What do I got going on here? Kind of funny. They might be tricking me. I see it over there. But things are being odd. It's probably this little for position only text. There you go. All right, so to explain that, because this is a template, they want to let you know the type of image you should place here. And it's placed or overlaid on top of the background fill. So I'm going to delete it. And there's my image that I've just placed. When I come in here, if I tell it to scale to fill or scale to fit, let's say, it's going to make sure that the height and the width always fits that container. So to be clear, I came in and grabbed a container that might have had fluid width, but because the fill is set to fill that container, I have kind of a happy compromise between those two intents. I get the sense that, I have to be honest, responsive is complex enough, and I'm going pretty fast today. This is why I've decided to do another session in 2 weeks where we slow it down and show every single tip and trick. But hopefully this is being helpful for you as a higher level, quick drive through. Let's go to another template, and this is from Chris Keller at 123 Muse. And Chris, if you go to 123 Muse, he will have this thing up there soon, and he wants to offer it to everybody for free. So it's not there yet, but I would check back in a Chris Keller kind of way, meaning he thinks really soon, but give him a few days. You can have this template as well. But let's go ahead and look at it in action and just get a sense of how he's built this out. So I'm going to say File, Preview Site in Browser, as we did before. And I will go ahead and bring it over into Safari because I would like to look at how the breakpoints are designed. So we'll let that fully render out. One thing Chris did in here that's pretty fun is almost all the graphics are SVG. And he's doing a lot of experimentation and sort of teaching about how to use SVG effectively within the site design. The old export process, this is to make Lance cringe, because that's what we do. Just try to make the designers cringe now and again. Uh-oh, we're all good. So I'm going to grab that URL and I'm going to go over to Safari and we'll take a look at it there. And so I've got this nice design, and you know, Chris is trying to purposefully challenge Muse a little bit and come up with tips that they will teach you. 123 Muse is more of a teaching company. They teach best practices and how to use the application in the real world. But notice as I scrub here, he's scaling his images. I could jump between some devices here and see where we go. But he's doing a 3 across grid that does just, he's actually not getting less on that grid. He's staying with 3 across, pretty much across the board. Let's jump to some of the other pages. So I've got my hamburger menu here. Now notice the approach he's using for a hamburger menu. Instead of that push menu that we saw out in the real world, or what Steve Harris offered, which is kind of a drop-down menu, this is using a lightbox widget. So I have the trigger for the lightbox. When I click it, it's going to always fill the canvas. Notice if I make my design larger, that navigation is going to always remain pretty centered. Horizontally for sure. See, I just jumped out of that breakpoint. See if I can get back in there. Show this up again. So centered width, and then you have a background fill. It's a nice way to kind of take over that experience using the widgets that we have today within the tool for this structure. Let's jump over to the portfolio page. Maybe. Okay. And we're going to pull this guy down. I might have stressed this guy out a little bit. Give it a minute to render. Let's try here. Not sure why it's thinking so hard, other than my computer's thinking awfully hard as I'm recording this screen. I'm going to escape quickly. Let's see. Go to that portfolio page. It's kind of working a little hard. Come on. This is the demo gods. So how did I get the tool? Oh, good. Let's talk about something else while this is loading. To take our minds off what might be going on here. The way I got it is you just open up Safari and there's a preference. I can't forget that. So under preferences, somewhere in here, you say you want to be developer mode. So there is something that you have to check. It's probably under advanced, and I don't want to stop and really dig it up right now, but check for the preference that allows you to bring up developer mode in Safari. And then you'll have in the menu this develop menu item. Click that, and then you're going to go ahead and select enter responsive design mode. Okay, so look at that. The page is loaded. Notice he's got a nice little breadcrumb here. That's always great to let people know where they are, so his navigation reflects that. He's got that lightbox nav applied. But notice that he's using the trick, which is he's got a few things going on here, but he's got icons. He's probably got a third-party widget that's doing this glow. Either that, actually maybe it isn't even a third-party widget. He's using SVG and using our transition effects. He may just be using transitions. I'm not positive because as we know, this is not my design. But notice as I go wider with my design, he's using a widget that has trigger target. So this is a standard non-responsive widget, but because he's using his triggers here on the left, his thumbnails, they remain on the left. So again, a design trick to deal with responsive designs using some of our existing widgets. All right, I do want to jump over and show one other thing. It's kind of a cameo, and I hope I can get back there before I say this too much. Okay, Ali Pordelli from Cookie.com is working with responsive Muse, and he's starting to look at how we can do a little bit fancier mobile menus. So he's also in the process of this. It's not quite done yet. You can tell him how excited you were to see it and ask him when he's going to be finished because he's almost done. But let me show you some of what he's got going on here. So this is a very simple widget where you can come in and say, I do want that sexy push menu that we saw on that very first non-Muse site. And he's implementing a lot of choices around it. So you could say, I want a push menu that pushes from the right. Notice that I click here and it's pushing. In this instance, it's not even pushing. So this menu is keeping, see how the background content is there? It's grayed out, so you can define a background fill there, and then you can close it. I bet he's got some others that are pushing, so let me just see. Yeah, he's got left push here, bottom push. Let's look at the left push. So I kind of like push. It's sort of one of those things that coders can do that we can't do directly in Muse quite yet. So I really like, even if you're using a third-party widget, to get to that place. So notice when I click this, see how left is over there? He's actually pushing the content, and then he's got elements here. This is an incredibly easy widget to work with. I have been sort of beta testing it for him. So if I come in, let's just pick, I want to pick a page that has some content, but I don't want to get into too much trouble because this is not my site and I don't know what I'm doing. But I'm going to come on in and just grab a page, and I'm just going to put some content here. I'm going to hit paste, and I want to add this third-party widget. So this is something you'll be able to buy from Cookie. It's the only thing I've shown you today that's not built into Muse, but I think it's worth it, and I think it's pretty straightforward. If I come into my library and drag this guy on a canvas and drop it somewhere I didn't mean to drop it. So let's zoom out here and just get it off to the side. So it can be anywhere. Does not really matter where these elements are, which is kind of interesting. It's a bit of a backdoor. But notice there is an example here. It's showing me what I currently have selected. If I click on this fly out, I can choose, do I want this push menu to come from the top, right, or left? And then he's got other options for full screen mode. That whole experience where it takes over, like the lightbox mode that Christopher Keller was doing. Vertical alignment I can define. The thing that's kind of magical about it is you can stick whatever you want in this container and it's just going to do the right thing. So he's giving you some sample content here. But let's say I've got a menu that I've generated. I know this site has no pages, but I can just go to the widget library, grab my menu, which is going to have like one page on it, I think. But if I come and drag this into this object, again, it's woefully empty here. But I just come on in and I can select how I want things to appear in this panel. This is my actual flyout panel. So I can decide the color that I want it to have. I can have buttons, videos, images, pretty much anything that you see within Muse. I decide what I want the closed box to look like, what I want the open box to look like. And then if I just come in and preview in browser, this may be awful, but let's take a look. It's going to automatically superimpose. It's probably got a white closed box, or I made a mistake here. Let's just see. There's my guy. I may need to fiddle a little bit because I may have done a live demo mistake. But trust me, this is why we're both still in beta test mode. Any of the elements that I put here, I can define how that push menu behaves as it drops over and back. Let's do one more thing. I've got 3 minutes, but let me just show you how you can do a menu using existing Muse that doesn't push, but it gets you pretty darn close. So let me show you a live site. Most of you have probably seen the Pigeon demo asset. So this is one that I built out. And as I come to smaller breakpoints, I do have a little hamburger here. And notice how it's pushing content down and it's allowing me to have things like a button and navigation. I built this using native Muse. So let me run through really quickly how I did go about building that, just so you don't think you have to use a third-party widget at this point. Like I said, I've been obsessing about menus lately, and push menus are kind of making me happy. If I wanted to implement this manual menu in this design, I'd go in and drop in a new breakpoint. I'd go to my library my widget library, and in the panels drop down, I would select an accordion panel. There's no way I'm going to do this in 2 minutes, but I'm going to try to give you the gist. I would drag this guy somewhere where I can see it reasonably. I would come in and delete the second and third panel because I really only need one. I would tell it that I want to clear all styling and clear all content. Very powerful feature that undoes all the default styling that we did. So all widget content. And then in this header area, you see a whole lot of nothing, which makes this extra hard right now. But I would come into CC Libraries, for example, where I have a close box. Notice I've got a little close box in black and white. I have an open box here. I'm going to grab the open box and I'm going to drag that over here onto the canvas. I'm going to cut it to the clipboard, come to the little accordion and make sure I'm in the normal state. Big trick there. And then I'm going to paste in as a background image that little close box guy. See where it's hiding down here at the bottom? I get rid of the default text. Come back into that pasted object, and in the drop-down fill area, I'm going to go and move it to the right, which means we can't see it now because it's hanging over here. I would then go to the normal. I jumped back to active there, so that needed to be a normal, but I would have the active state have the X or the close box. And then all you need to do from there is go in and grab, for example, a menu as I just did, and drag that guy over into this area here. You want to also make sure that it's set to can close all, and you don't want it to overlap items below, which means it's going to push the content down. So if we come back here, notice how everything pushes down. I've got my normal state And then that's my active state. As background fills, they're SVG, so they'll scale appropriately, load very quickly. I created a fill color that's just a tint. And because this is an accordion menu, you need to set it to be responsive width. And you can make it happen. So if you are really struggling with this, what you can do is go to the tutorial section of the microsite, wherein we have how to create a responsive website in Muse, which takes you to a CC Learn area where for about 65 minutes of recordings, I build this whole site out for you. But the extra juicy advantage of this tutorial is there is a link here to the Responsive Web Design Muse library. If you click that and save it to your Creative Cloud, in there I've got a fully built out accordion menu that you're welcome to take and reskin or design for your own use.